So good morning, everyone, and welcome to the start of our Series 4 of our Protiviti and Robert Half Collaboration Forum. It's great to be back for a new series and to be able to collaborate with you and to be inspired by you all once again. My name's Paul Middleton. I'm a Managing Director in Protiviti, and I'm joined here today by my colleagues from Protiviti, as well as by my colleagues from our sister company, Robert Half. It's great to see both familiar faces and new faces here today, and we promise you another terrific series of debates over the next 10 weeks on a range of topics that will invigorate, challenge and inspire us, and that are designed to bring us all optimisms in these tough times. We started these forums in March last year at the start of the pandemic with the intention of creating a regular interactive forum for business leaders where, in the face of the challenges, the disruptions and the uncertainties you faced, you could talk to each other, learn from each other, challenge each other and gain confidence from each other's perspectives. 10 months have passed since then, and the challenges, the disruption and the uncertainty remains, and arguably it's even greater. With lockdown 3, new COVID variants, hospitals stretched more than we could possibly imagine, and a vaccine programme battling to take hold, the health of UK PLC is more precarious than ever. Combine this with the effects of Brexit, political turmoil, dry January and the gloom of a lockdown winter, it's easy for some of us to lose perspective. So, having held over 35 of these forums last year, we wanted to launch this, our 4th series, to bring you renewed perspective, fresh insights and a healthy dose of confidence and optimism, as we still believe that within this adversity, with collaboration and the right mindset, lies opportunity for us all. To unlock this optimism and opportunity, we need to be bold and we need to be different. A common thread that's run through all of our forums and that's been a rallying cry for us here at Protiviti and Robert Half is that now is the time to think differently and to be actioning both big and small ideas. Put differently, if we don't drive change during this continued period of disruption, we run the risk of rapidly becoming irrelevant. To help you do this, we'll be bringing you new speakers and new inspirators each week to kickstart the debate. Next week, we have entrepreneur and innovator Priya Lakhani. In the following weeks, we'll bring you CEOs, business leaders and industry luminaries who are all driving inspiring visions and positive change, all of whom will share perspectives that you can react to. And react is exactly what we want you to do. This isn't a closed forum. Unlike some webinars you may have joined, you are not permanently muted or expected to be a silent participant. This is a collaboration forum. We want you to be here and to be part of the debate, to hear your voice and to learn from your insights in the true spirit of collaboration. To get involved, you can raise your hand using the Teams button in the right-hand corner and I'll come to you. You can write your thoughts in the chat, or if you just can't contain yourself and you're bursting with energy at this time in the morning, you can take yourself off mute and let us hear what you have to say. But please get involved as it's infectious. To kick off the series today, I'm delighted to introduce you to our lead inspirator for this week, Paul Mason. Paul is a well-known author, broadcaster and journalist. He may be most familiar to you as the culture and digital editor, as well as the economics editor of Channel 4 News, a role he previously held on the BBC's Newsnight programme. Describing himself as a radical social democrat, he's rarely short of an opinion to stir debate and is currently a freelance journalist regularly called upon to appear on political, economic and social debates on both radio and television. Paul's also a well-published author with over 6 books to his name, a number of which are focused on likely future economic and social change, a topic we'll be touching on today. So in this, the first of our series, I'd like to tempt you all to look beyond the here and now and dare to dream of recovery, revival and business as usual, or business as unusual, whatever the future may look like. And this isn't just about pandemic recovery, but a pandemic recovery combined with broader macro trends, such as the effects of Brexit, the ongoing digital revolution, the demographic shift away from our city centres, working from home, climate and ESG imperatives in one big perfect storm, as we often like to say here in Protiviti. So we'll be talking about what the recovery can look like, what will have changed, how will this affect you, your business, your industry, what should you do to get ready, what will the opportunities be, and hopefully be hearing from you on all of those topics too. To help us from time to time, I'll be calling on some of our own fertility consultants to share their own research and perspectives on the themes we'll be discussing, for which they've had total editorial control. But first, I'd like to welcome once again Paul Mason and start by asking you, Paul, to share your initial thoughts, please, around whether and how we should be preparing for a surge in consumer demand as we dare to imagine that at some point in a vaccinated future, we'll reach the other side of this pandemic. Paul, it's a perfect start. You're on mute. I didn't think I'd say that this early, but you are.
Somebody muted me secretly. Hello, good morning, everybody, and thank you. Well, yeah, the short answer to your question, Paul, is yes, there'll be a surge. I think that we have to think about. If we can, I've got a slide I want to just show you. It's a world GDP index from the OECD. Is that should be up now? Yeah.
Yes, it's
yes,
yeah, sure.
Thank you. Yeah. So look, the pink line is what we're concerned about. The grey is what should have happened. Steady growth in the world. 2 to 3% growth. What happened is we had a dip, a big dip. 10% of world GDP, and this is the level. This is not the rate of growth; it's the level. Which is what we're concerned about here. And my question has always been: at what point do we get back to where we were? And then the second question is: do we carry on growing at the same rate? Now, the OECD predictions, they are the think tank that I trust the most. I think they're sophisticated and they are independent and they're prepared to constantly look on the downside in the service of making people think hard. But look, the pink line is rising at the same rate as the grey line. So the long-term trend is that, is going to be recovered. The only question is, how long do we take to get there? And as you can see, they offer three scenarios, a current projection. So let's take that. If that comes true, then really, the kind of feeling of normalness on which all of the confidence measures are based comes back in the middle of Q3 this year. That's in the world. Obviously, some countries quicker, others not. If you're sitting in New Zealand, you're saying, what confidence problem? Unless you're exporting. But look, there is a downside scenario. You can see it's a pale pink line. And in that scenario, instead of, I think, how many years do we lose? And if the thick pink line happens, we've basically lost 1 3/4 years to this virus. If the downside scenario happens, we actually lose 3 years to it. Now, I think that's unlikely. But let's remember, because a little under a year ago, many of us, we can take the slide down now if you want. I think you might rather see my face than this slide. A little under a year ago, all of us were thinking about, what's the worst case scenario? Will there ever be a vaccine? Will it mutate? Will the health service fall over? And so were politicians. People were terrified. It was a white knuckle time. But I think it's fairly obvious that there are answers to all those questions, and it's difficult to estimate how big of a feel-good factor there already is because of the vaccine. As long as the vaccine is ahead of the mutations, people can see a back to normal pathway. And when I say people, I mean consumers, I mean clients, I mean investors, and I think. So even if we end up with somewhere between the optimal case and the worst case scenario for the OECD, I'm still pretty confident that afterwards the rates of growth will be the same or slightly better because of the pent-up demand, which we'll come to. And I think also that there is definitely light at the end of the tunnel. That's the difference between the Zoom calls you made in April and the Zoom calls you're making now. Although for UK-based listeners, it's worth saying that just in the last hour, the REACT study, which measures the prevalence of the virus in the population, not the deaths, not the hospitalizations, it's an anonymized study. They're saying the R rate in Britain is still 1, so we've still got exponential growth, and because the levels are much higher. If I was planning for a UK consumer facing business, I would really put some sort of padding in towards late spring, in terms of employees coming back to work in pubs and restaurants. I'd be thinking, hold on a minute, guys, with that level of prevalence and an R rate, it might not be Easter. Now, if we could just look at my other slide, which I'm afraid is quite grainy, it's kind of Zoom level grainy, which is just about UK consumer credit. If we could have that one up, please. I'll waffle until it comes up. Okay, I mean, when it comes up, it should show that the UK, it's coming. Yeah, there it is. Okay, this is also from the OECD. I'm sorry, this is a tangle of lines, but what you want to be looking at is the grey line. It's the UK. So this is consumer credit growth. The two grey bars are when the recessions have been in living memory. One is the global financial crisis. The other is now. Now here's the thing. If we compare the US blue and the euro, sorry, US is green, euro area is blue. Their consumer credit does not react as violently as ours does. So, and look at in this crisis in particular, the fall in, I assume this is demand for consumer credit, not supply. Remember, the bank base rate is 0. We can take that off now. It's the thing to take away here is that the UK domestic economy seems quite fragile in terms of consumer confidence and appetite for risk. So when I look at that graph, I think that's UK consumers going, hold on a minute, something bad's happening. I'm not, forget the new car, forget moving house, forget, pay down the credit cards, quick lads. That's the kind of attitude that I think is built into the UK consumer in a crisis. Now, the good thing is, if you can take the upside of that, because there always is an upside and has been an upside, then I think that we as a country, the UK, will probably excel ourselves in terms of slightly crazy consumer spending and running down involuntary savings. We're quite an aging population, so the grey pound is already the main driver of consumer demand, and lots of people in my age bracket, I'm 60, will have, I hope everybody say he doesn't look 60, but lots of people in our age bracket will have been quite scared about what's happening. They hear on the news every day, you are the one who's going to die. Someone will know people, many of us do know people who have unfortunately in our professional and personal lives had this disease and died. But if there's an absolute plummeting risk of getting it, I think that grey pound will head where? It will head to the car showroom, it will head to the housing market, it will head to holidays on a scale previously unimagined, because people also at the grey pound have time. So I said it was going to be a short answer, but my short answer is yes. The question is when, and if you are, this is turning into the big question for most of the businesses I deal with. For those who have been able to leap into a niche, I've ended up with a milkman. I never had a milkman. For people listening offshore, a milkman is a man with an electrically powered, very slow cart who arrives at your door and puts milk in a glass bottle on the doorstep. This is a British tradition. I hadn't had one for 40 years. I have a milkman, but guess what? It's an online one and he'll deliver anything. So, businesses like that should be looking at 3 to 6 to 9 months of extra time to consolidate the base, trying to do the customer relationship management, gather the data, and build a new platform. Same with the flour guy. I now have a flour delivery man. It's those opportunities will get, I think, 3 to 6 to 9 months extra kind of life if we end up in the worst and downside scenario. But that's the long but hopefully interesting answer to your question, Paul.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. Thank you for that. You'll be pleased to know there's some complimentary comments about your age in the chat. But do we risk with that surge coming through and being driven by the grey pound, and as we splash into holidays and housing and everything else, like you just said, is there a risk here that the UK is going to be lurching from boom to bust? And how do we avoid that with some of those other trends coming through, some of those other macro trends that I mentioned coming through as well?
Okay, well, there obviously is, and people have talked about the Roaring Twenties as a model for what to expect. Remember, that ended in a bust after 7 years, the Wall Street crash. And I am worried about asset prices already. I'm worried that large numbers of asset classes. I mean, the number one is Bitcoin, which personally I stay very, very distant from, and all cryptocurrencies. But there are others. However, it's also the case that the First World War ended with a boom and then a sharp bust. In fact, 1920-21 was the worst global collapse in history, and people have been comparing now to then. It wasn't, the Roaring Twenties were sort of 1924, 25, 26. It wasn't 22, 23. People were still quite worried. And of course, the other thing is, we're 100 years later. We have a much more complex economy, and therefore you could argue some bits a bit more resilient, other bits more fragile. A lot of it, and we may get some questions on this, is fragile to geopolitical threat and change. So, I would caution anybody in the investment or the consumer-led business sectors to think there's a one-way ticket back to prosperity. What the problem has been for the UK specifically, let's think about this. Sadly, I'm old enough to remember reporting the global financial crisis and its aftermath. In the aftermath, British political parties, both Labour and then the incoming Conservative Liberal government, said we need to move this economy away from consumer-led growth towards business investment-led growth. That was the British strategy. Now, I would argue that Brexit placed a hit on that. It basically, you could argue temporarily, but the results are incontrovertible. Inward investment into Britain is down since 2016. And it's not because it's a horrible place to invest, it's just about the uncertainty. So we have this uncertainty problem in Britain that was supposed to be solved by doing the Brexit deal. You've also got the problem that now there's an uncertainty problem about the United Kingdom. Is it going to exist? I think it is a real possibility that Scotland gets an independence referendum and ends up voting for it. So it's 6 million people. It's a financial services centre. It's a big agricultural economy, services economy. But yes, there are opportunities there, but it's more uncertainty. And so, even if we get a consumer-driven, grey pound-driven, running down involuntary savings driven surge, say for safety's sake, autumn, winter, so next Christmas, retailers, online or offline, should be brilliant. Even if we get that, the problem with the UK economy's long-term resilience is the absence of inward investment. You can look at people like Nissan saying, hold on a minute, are we going to, yes, we might keep this plant, but are we really going to build the future cars here? It's also, you see financial services is already migrating to Dublin, Frankfurt, anywhere it can. Fine, well, not all of us work there. The interesting question is, as you know, the services to financial services, the services around financial services, so the consultancy groups themselves, and the technology that serves that, well, we've learned it can be done anywhere. And in my own personal network, I have people who work now to Dublin, where Dublin is the financial centre that they're servicing, and they're thinking, well, since I've never been to Dublin because I'm doing it all online. Well, where would I like to live? And I think that the COVID crisis has really made many high skill, high value people think questions like that. And do you want to live in a place that is not attracting inward investment, that is not the number one place that people think is the buzzingest place to be? That's a question, no, I think, in the minds of a lot of people in professional life. So those are some of the caveats about the Roaring Twenties scenario.
Thank you, Paul. Just thank you for some of the comments coming through on the chat. Just a brief perspective here then, Paul. Do you think that with those cycles you talked to, continued uncertainty, a surge, but lack of inward investment, is that going to stop, is that going to alter some of the longer term cycles we see between capitalism, or an alternative to that, people's willingness, I guess, to invest and
look. This is my mastermind specialist subject. I mean, I've written a book called Post-Capitalism, which is about how automation and information technology changes the dynamics of capitalism in a way that no previous round of innovation has. And I could see from the chat somebody called Rupert Cornford asked a question, will the long-term cycles of capitalism be disrupted? And I think they are being disrupted. It's not a tragedy once you understand what is happening.
Yeah.
And this is the first industrial revolution that doesn't really create more jobs than it destroys. That's the short version of what's happening. It means that a lot of growth is actually supported by, at the moment, I don't think it's an accident at all that a lot of growth is being supported by governments and central banks. Central bank money creation is driving Western growth. Now, within that, we have two imperatives. One imperative is the one that I'm really hopeful that we're now going to see emerge as a consensus, because with Joe Biden's confirmation in inauguration yesterday, the first thing he did was sign the Paris Climate Accord. They've re-entered, and so there is, for the first time, an alignment. Let's remember, Xi Jinping underwent a huge conversion, and the Chinese state underwent a huge conversion to green economics in the middle of the last decade, but that coincided with Trump. So now, as America emerges back into the game of climate mitigation, China is already there, and Europe is absolutely there. So we've got a kind of the imperative to transform the economy towards zero net carbon by the middle of the century is going to be a big one. And then so that's the given one. The one that's more controversial is the one I argue for and argue about, is the need for a low work society.
Okay.
And I think that the low work aspect of it, the transition to a different mix between work and incomes, is the disruption. And we can maybe talk more about that. Of course, it's a slow one. So operationally, day to day, year to year, it isn't the thing that drives your business, but it is what many strategists in bigger businesses are constantly thinking about.
I'd like to dig in, if I may, I like Rupert's the conscious green form of capitalism, if I may, and just dig into that a little bit more and understanding to what extent that's going to be a priority for us here in the UK and post pandemic. I mentioned at the start, we've asked some of our colleagues within Fertility just to share a little bit of research on that. Lauren, would you like just to share some statistics, some thoughts you have around that?
Of course, Paul. Great. So ESG can hardly be described as a new topic anymore, with Morningstar producing investment research reporting that sustainable funds in Europe attracted record inflows of 54.6 billion euros in the second quarter of 2020, as you can see in this graph. The question that business leaders and employees should be asking themselves is, are we doing enough about ESG? As Paul already referenced, there is significant progress being made on the EU Sustainable Action Finance Plan, with notable milestones including the final issue of the taxonomy regulation for sustainable activities. And last year, we saw the Dear CEO letter released from the Bank of England discussing the March 2021 mandate for understanding and internalising financial risks relative to climate change. But where does the UK sit within this progress? Well, according to Jürgen Meyer in his interview given on Sky News last week, we could be doing much more. He is calling for a bolder industrial strategy on the UK's sustainable future, and research suggests that consumer demand for ESG transparency will reach a new high in the post-pandemic world.
Thank you, Lauren. So, Paul, just reflecting on that, then, there is a sentiment that it's going to become more of a priority. It's going to become more of a defining factor in the DNA of many companies and their brand as they go to market. Are we doing enough? And how do you think our approach to ESG considerations are going to be changed by the trends we're talking about?
Look, let's be blunt. I think the business world has been slow to understand, sometimes terminally slow, how important this was going to be. With more than 2 decades of interaction with people in what used to be called SRI and then CSR, and now it's ESG, those parts of those businesses were always kind of we kind of sitting out there at the edge of the boardroom table, telling people that this stuff was going to happen, and then it happened. I interface with numerous NGOs, one of which is called Platform. It's quite a radical NGO, very anti-fossil fuel, and they conducted a big campaign about 5 years ago with local councils saying, pull out all investment you have in coal. It's the wrong thing to invest in, and there'll be a tipping point when everybody realizes that, and coal will fall through the floor. And all the arguments were, no, we don't agree with you, or maybe it isn't, or why, coal's been important to our community. I'm from a coal mining community myself in Lee in Lancashire. But what happened in the end wasn't that they won the argument morally or ethically. What happened is that China and the European Union pulled the plug on coal, and coal has fallen through the floor. So now exactly what this 10 people in a railway arch in Islington, that's what the Platform is, they were right. And what they want has happened. And that, I think, is an illustration of why ESG is important. When BlackRock last year, was absolutely clear with both its investors and the firms it invests in, that there's going to be a major change, that zero carbon is coming. That's canary in the coal mine, almost literally. And I think that no, how does it work its way through to operational decisions and strategic decisions for SMEs and for managers? Let's give another example. In November, Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, announced that there would be 16 billion over 4 years invested into the military. Okay, so do your maths, 4 billion a year. It's a lot, actually, given it's a small industry with low skill shortages, capacity shortages. Now, they predict that investing 16 billion over 4 years will create 40,000 jobs. It's a nice round figure. You can imagine what those jobs will be. All jobs in defence are skilled. Now, so 40,000 skilled jobs, I'm thinking, great. If we transform the economies of, think about the United Kingdom, over the next 20 to 25 years towards that zero net carbon, then when Labour put its manifesto together, and I took part in this, the realistic estimates were that they would be spending between 100 and 200 billion to do this. So, okay, then you do the maths. If 16 billion creates 40,000 jobs, a massive green transformation should create the jobs of the next. There'll be skill shortages everywhere, basically, and there'll be high and middle skill shortages as well. So I think the big if is if, and I think, as I say, the politics is going to line up. Biden, Xi Jinping, the European Commission. Yes, there's some outliers. Australia remains the outlier. Canada is kind of naughty on some of these things as well. But by the mid-2020s, I cannot see it as unlikely that we are then in the beginnings of the green upsurge. So that, for me, is the double plus the double positive of if we can defeat COVID, we end up in a green investment. And here's the thing, predictable. So if you're sitting in Hull, east of England, it's already the UK's centre for offshore wind manufacture. What you want is to capture everything. If you're Middlesbrough, that could have been the UK centre. You want some of this. So the Cardiff Bay, the Bristol Channel, I think eventually that the tidal barrage, which could power the whole of South Wales in electricity, will be built. The building that, design and build of it, and the running of it is just a huge opportunity. And my urge to governments is just get on with it, really.
So, Paul, you're touching on a lot of big themes here, and thank you for the comments coming through. And I think I will come to those. We're touching on themes such as skill migration, labour market trends, and you're touching on there and how like the green agenda is just an example of how that traditional labour market is going to be disrupted post-COVID as Brexit kicks in, and all those other trends as well. Again, just to wet as we move towards discussing that and bring in some of the questions that I've seen, could I just ask my colleague Theo just to share some thoughts and statistics around that as well in a similar way, please?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So even before this crisis, changing technologies and new ways of working were already disrupting jobs and the skills that employees need to do them. Back in 2017, McKinsey actually estimated that around 14% of the global workforce would need to switch occupations or acquire new skills to keep up with automation and AI. What we're actually seeing now is that this has been accelerated as a result of the pandemic and digital transformation becoming more relevant. I think as a result of the pandemic, we're not only going to see this migration towards a more tech-savvy workforce, but we're going to see large reskilling efforts as firms work out how to match their workers to new roles, new activities, and new ways of working. Pre-COVID, the most commonly cited reason for reskilling was to enable the implementation of new technologies, offerings, and business models. So the pandemic has only emphasised the need for this. I think to be confident moving forward, firms need to nurture their employees in key skill areas. We're looking at digital, cognitive, social and emotional, and adaptability and resilience. As new ways of business become the norm, employees must be equipped to operate in digital environment, to be able to operate remotely, be innovative and adapt to rapidly changing conditions, and be critical thinkers. Looking ahead, there's a real opportunity for firms to focus on skill building to stay competitive and prepare for future disruptions. And although these programs are generally at an early stage, many organisations are already seeing positive results from them. Ultimately, companies can't be resilient if their workforces aren't, and it's going to be really interesting to see how companies address this issue.
Thank you, Theo. So, Paul, just reflecting on that then, should we expect to see a migration of skills given those trends that Theo's highlighted and given what you said before, but also reflecting on some of the questions, does that need to be driven by more state intervention to create that happen? But also, as someone's pointed out in the chat, is this going to lead to a need for a universal income of a sort, yeah, like Scandinavia and Spain have and others, because of those that are disenfranchised by this, just to support the economy in a way that we are at the minute during COVID?
So I've been a big advocate both of the universal basic income and what the NICE, the National Institute, calls the universal basic services. But these are not, for those of us who advocate UBI and UBS, these are not seen as remedial or crisis measures. They're seen as transitional measures to a position where at some point in the future, work and wages are delinked. They're not completely delinked, but there's just not going to be enough high-skilled work to absorb the population, even with earlier retirement or whatever. And remember, later retirement has been the imperative from a fiscal point of view. But so those of us who advocate UBI, UBS, advocate them as a long-term transitional subsidy towards a highly automated economy, in which there is a lot of leisure time, there is a lot of cultural production and consumption, a lot of person-to-person services, but not a lot of low-skilled work. The obvious example, and this example is non-theoretical if you're in the automobile business, or indeed the fulfillment business. There are right now about 470,000 van drivers in Britain. And in fact, it's boom time for van drivers because of everybody's buying things using e-commerce. But 9/10 of those are male. So we're talking about men whose job is to drive a van. Some of them not so skilled and educated. Many of them actually quite aren't. They just like driving vans. My dad was a van driver. It's a job. In the long-term strategy of Amazon, there won't be any van drivers. In the long-term strategy of Tesla, there are no van drivers. Now, those are two quite big companies, as we know, and they don't take stupid decisions or make crazy predictions. They are planning for a world without van drivers. So it's axiomatic that the British government has to think, well, what do those van drivers do? As our UK viewers will know, those van drivers are also a politically explosive mass. I mean, where I am, many of them are migrants. Where I come from, many of them are people whose views are seen to be aligned with the right. That white van man is a kind of, it's a stereotype. It's a wrong stereotype. But no, you see, that's the problem. And who owns that problem? Amazon doesn't own it. Tesla doesn't own it. The government needs to own it. And so the idea of a UBI should be, it's a bit like work-life balance for a lifetime. So that you can decide, well, all right, I would like to retrain as an actor or as a masseur, and I still get a little sliver of income. Anybody who's drawing their company pension knows what it's like to have a little sliver of income, and you can work on top of it. That's actually what the UBI will cost a lot fiscally. That's the challenge. But before we get there, let me talk about something that reacts to those stats that were put up by our colleague there about skills and where it's going. I think actually, here's the thing: the next generation of workers, and what's the first problem? We've got a disrupted generation. People doing their A levels now, people in the lower sixth form, people supposed to be taking their A levels in summer, people who took them last year. So that's 3 years worth, plus 3 years worth of college people, are all a bit disrupted, and that will produce a workforce that's a little bit insecure feeling, and that I'm afraid just hasn't got the same level of attainment and skill that it should have. So the first thing is we need to do something about that. We need to help them, and firms are going to have to help people they recruit from this, who've had their education disrupted. But that generation, I think, will build the green economy, and it will build the smart economy. If you're looking at smart city design, as places like Barcelona are, then you're thinking, what do they do, cities like that? They invest in all kinds of things like creative labs, cooperative spaces, free spaces for artists. Why do they do that? Why do they do that? Because they want to create a critical mass of young, educated people who like living there and want to design the city so that, for example, its health services and its transport system can run digitally in a semi-automated way, in a green way. I think there'll be paradoxically, for the next 10 to 15 years, if there is political will, there'll be quite a lot of work. And somebody in the sidebar has pointed out, automation creates jobs. I absolutely accept that. It creates jobs automating things, and it displaces. But you have to bear in mind the counter phenomenon. The late American anthropologist David Graeber wrote an iconic book. He's a friend, actually, died last year. He wrote an iconic book whose title was Bullshit Jobs. And what David said is that the flip side to automation is you get the creation of jobs that don't really need to exist. My favorite, or not favorite, one of these is hand car washes. There used to be 20,000 installed automatic car washes in British garage forecourts, and now there's probably half of that and instead there's 20,000 hand car washes because people can do the job cheaper than a machine. For me, as a economic historian, that's not capitalism. That's the reverse. So yeah, it's the politician's job to deal with the big thing. For corporations, I think the picture I see in that graph that your colleague showed me is exactly right. It's the migration of all skill towards the human centric and person to person. But I would put one caveat in there before I stop waffling. But the caveat is we need more technologists. We're not just an innovative country, actually. We're a country of inventors. But the gap, the specific gap between someone who can handle further maths and someone who can't, but could get a maths A level even, but can't do the further maths, is the gap between world beating and not world beating. Now, I think, because I've been through this with my own godchildren, that we should, if society can't, then it's the companies are going to have to, we've always got this problem in aerospace, for example, of you've got PhDs in physics who can't do billable work because they need a year to 18 months training to be able to be sat in front of the thing, the CAD that designs the aircraft, and then do work that you can charge for. That bottleneck is going to get bigger and bigger. And I don't know, because government can't solve it. I think it's for big firms, industry bodies, to get so many people as possible, from designing to coding, from mathematical literacy to really advanced maths. That's also the future. We can't just assume everybody's going to be doing cognitive and kind of emotional management. We're going to need a hard edge, a cadre of people who can do the math.
Yeah, and Paul, you touched on within that hard edge, you've touched on some important other points around human centricity, and I'd like to come back to that in a moment. First, I'd just like to open this to the floor. Paul, you've made a number of comments. We've covered a lot of ground in 40 minutes. Does anyone? I know there's comments coming through. Does anyone have a question they'd like to take directly to Paul? This is people now struggling to find the mute button. Okay, I'll keep going then, but please do just put your hand up or interrupt, as I say. Oh yeah, Sarah, you have your hand up.
Yes, I have a question, and it's about the future and that 2030 vision and the split of working hours going forward in the different skill groups. Our education system is not geared up for getting people into those areas. So how do you suggest we as businesses, help support those areas for continued growth?
Which particular areas, Sarah?
So the particular areas I'm thinking of are social and emotional, so the entrepreneurs and then the technology jobs. Right.
Look, I think that the bottleneck is as I suggested. It's I'm sorry. It's the education system, but then it's the early stage careers of people that I think that there's the industry sectors, for example, like the construction industry. When I was covering construction industry, it had a levy. I think it probably still does have a levy that's meant to go into the transitioning people from basic skills to middle and higher skill. Learning on the job is what most professionals still have to do, but as the tasks become more complex, and in particular, we can't underestimate this problem of the interpersonal and interhuman skills, because not everybody has them innately. That you'd want to see much more proactive corporate management of the skills pathway of a workforce. Let me give you an example from my personal life. At the BBC and at Channel 4, all broadcasters who have mandatory 5-day residential courses for people who go into hostile environments. Now, these courses, you have to do it every 3 years. So people you see on the TV have been put through the mill by basically South African SAS members every 3 years in a kind of boot camp. Everybody who's been on that loves it. I have to say, what do they teach? You know, I don't suggest any of you do this at home, but they teach you how to get through a checkpoint. And the way that it happens is that at the end of the checkpoint, you have less money in your wallet than you had when you went into it. Now, that is not a legal thing to do for a corporation, but that is what they teach you to do. Now, on a more mundane level, I've never met a single person who comes out of that course who is less confident than they were before. Some higher executives, of course, get this course. People in CEOs and C-suite people go on it, but I'm thinking of things like that. The human skills you gain by being, sort of fictitiously kidnapped for half a day are pretty amazing. And when we say blandly to our colleagues, we need to nurture the human-to-human skills of people, we need to be a little bit less euphemistic about what that is. It's how do you handle this high intensity emotion of the workplace? And when everybody comes back into the workplace, it'll be even more intense. There'll be even more, everything, the dating, the rows, the petty jealousies, they'll be much worse. But to think seriously about it, if I was managing a big workforce, I'd want a much more proactive approach to those real human skills. And like I say, I think actually literally, sometimes one gets to meet really rich people and they say, what could I buy my 21-year-old for their birthday present? And I say, send them on the course. You'll never regret it.
I'd like to bring in a couple more questions, if I may, Paul. Raj, I think you had your hand up next, I saw.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Paul. Morning, Paul.
Hi,
Firstly,
Raj.
Look, thanks for the morning. I think it's been very insightful. And I actually represent the grey pound, but I consider myself C-suite as well. I've just resigned from a job in construction, given the carnage in the industry and so on. So my point is, despite the carnage caused by COVID, caused by Brexit, in my opinion at least, I see that necessary societal and economic changes have been accelerated, and probably for the greater good in the end. What are your views, and do you see any positives coming through this year? And I know you've captured them in the round, I guess, but succinctly maybe.
Well, look, the big positive I see coming through this year is that all disruptions shake out stuff that probably shouldn't be there. And that's, none of us like that, but it's kind of, there's been a hit and hope element to some businesses, and businesses get also relying on incredibly low margins to either gain share, which is fine, or to basically just survive and service debt. I think the overall upside I see for C-suite people is we've had a moment of realism about what the business is. I know people who've run shops for years and they love the shop and their emotional life is around it, and they looked at it and they've gone, sorry. I mean, I'm thinking of one particular niche jeweler who I've known for decades. She just went, I'm sorry, I'm just going online. I'm getting towards retirement. I'm going online. The shop was lovely to have with all the twinkling, sparkling diamonds and the velvet cushions. But, I'm more concerned about my bottom line, and therefore I'm going online. No, I think we should all take a good look at, many of us operate across many sectors. We should all take a look at those sectors. I think the other thing is that I described the milkman before, but I think it's a very, very interesting concept. The company is Milk and More. I don't know how big they are. Freddie's Flowers has gone from being a London-based thing, which is a man delivers flowers on a bike to you. So my sister now orders it. I see lots of niche consumer brands moving to online only, and I think that that's a huge opportunity. It's an opportunity for the marketing sector because online marketing is difficult. It's an opportunity for social media sector. It's an opportunity to rethink the structure of costs in a business. But you can distribute the workforce. All of those things I see as opportunities, and I've always thought as a computer head, going back to the 1990s, we would end up with a massive and radically innovative e-commerce sector, and that's what we've now got. There's no doubt about it. If you're an entrepreneur now starting with a pot of money or a loan, there's a strong incentive to think, what can I do online with a good marketing campaign? So I think that I'll tell you what I think the downside, I must mention this, especially for people who are in executive roles, is this that we're doing cannot substitute for the interhuman contact. I've managed to make 3 trips this year, all to Germany, Bonn and 2 Berlin trips. And it was like suddenly getting to an oasis in the desert. You learn more emotionally and even just purely informationally from real human to human contact. We mustn't underestimate that. And in fact, I now consciously place a kind of filter over things I hear on Zoom and Microsoft Teams, because I think, what would I hear if I'd actually heard that in the bar at a conference? How seriously would I have taken it? But yeah, I think but as you can tell, Raj, I am actually very positive, especially now that I see a virus and I see the possibility of walking out into that street confidently within 6 months.
Yeah,
I'd say a vaccine, not a virus.
Paul, I'd like to take one other brief. I think we've got time for one other brief question from Kelvin, and thank you very much for that, Raj. Appreciate the question. And then, Paul, I'd like just to turn to some thinking around how this corporate moral philosophy and whether that needs to change or not. Kelvin, you've been kind enough to post some comments in the chat as well. I think you used to work for Jürgen Meyer. You had a question as well, sir?
Yes. Hello, Paul. I'm a solicitor, but I actually started my career as an electrical engineer. And I wondered what you thought the role was, if there is a role for the media in portraying industrial and engineering and technology jobs when compared against the backdrop of Love Island and some of the other typical programs today. Okay,
look, I think that is a great question. I speak a lot to young people, and my frustration is, that they believe they've come to believe the only way to success is to become famous, to be a Premiership footballer or a YouTube or Instagram person, or as you say, Love Island. And I think the first thing is that the problem with the high-skill, high-tech workplace is it's also a closed workplace for reasons of protecting IP. I've been lucky enough to, as a journalist, to get into workplaces where you're signing NDAs, you're being sort of scanned and checked. Not only in this country, I've been into some amazingly secure workplaces in China. And when you get in there, you think, oh my goodness, what an amazing place this is. What a fantastic job this must be. I mean, probably the most spectacular one is McLaren. McLaren have this space age bubble somewhere in the south of England, Guildford or somewhere, and inside it. And the first thing you notice is that they start at a particular time, they end at a time, lunch happens in a canteen. And I remember when I was there, I said, of course, it's physically spectacular. I said, why do you still do lunch? And they said, well, we don't want people taking sandwiches or Mars bars close to a 2 microns thick piece of sort of steel. And I never realized until then what high precision engineering manufacturing looked like. So the problem we've got is that people in their sixth form don't either. So how are they ever going to get, I would hope that the media, and there's a lot of media out there, people want to consume things. Documentary channels are big business right now. I'm in that business myself. We need a documentary about what it's like to be a McLaren auto engineer. It's actually very glamorous as well, because occasionally all the pizzazz turns up. McLaren does its own, for example, as I remember, they do their own catering. So that means they get to employ all the people who are trackside at a race. So imagine the opportunities if you're a young person there. So I think that's, Kelvin, the thing that I want to say here is that industry sectors could be doing a lot more here. And of course, the big problem we've had in the UK is that finance is a great magnet for all talent. Finance, and you're in the consulting business, so it's also a magnet for talent. And even in my own family, I have members of my own family who do have further maths A level and are studying engineering, and I can still feel in the back of their mind the idea that they might use all this to go and become a quant in the city. Well, good for them if they do, and retire at 40. That's their dream. But we've got to find ways of incentivizing people towards the green, the technological, the automotive, the smart city future. And I think the key is just to give them a feel of it.
Yeah.
But here's one final thing. You've got to get a lot more people to the base camp where they believe they could even do it.
So, Paul, going back to that human-centric angle then, that green, that technological workforce, what do you say to the business leaders on this call and wider about the need for changes in that corporate moral philosophy to be able to better manage that evolved workforce? And just a few thoughts there, please. We've got 3 minutes left.
Yeah. All right. This is my number one obsession, is that business ethics, if you're in pharmaceutical manufacturing, are quantifiable. You phone up the ethics department and you apply the ethical code that you've inherited from the industry to the project. If you're going to unleash a machine on human beings that interacts with them, passes the Turing test, even partially or temporarily, as a quasi human being, and many more of us are in that business now. Your company has to have a moral philosophy. It has to have a theory of human beings, what it thinks about human beings. Even if, as an individual person, I block somebody on Twitter, I should be thinking, is it moral to block them? Should I be allowed to block them? Do I want to ethically block them? So it's the more human-centric business becomes, the more I argue that businesses should stop thinking about ethical codes and creatively think about and proactively think about choosing moral philosophies. And that's a frightening thing to do, because it's easy to hire a consultancy that will produce you the ethical code. To have the boardroom discussion, there are more than one moral code. There's more than one religion and religion type. And it's your choice to, how do you want to treat people? How do you want to treat people in the world they live? And you'll be judged by it ultimately. And the ESG tells us you'll probably be judged financially by it in the long run.
Yeah. Paul, everyone, we've covered a huge amount of ground there. Thank you all ever so much. We've gone from looking to the future to looking at what that economic change is going to be, to looking at the changes in the workforce, the labour market trend, the corporate moral philosophy, the bullshit jobs, the UBI, and I'm sure lots of people will be signing up for those kind of training courses, Paul. People seem to love the idea around that. And let's not forget the importance of real human contact. I'd really like to give a shout out for next week, if I may. We have Priya Lakhani, entrepreneur, CEO, again, to give us that light of optimism next week. And I think that'll be another amazing session. But I'd really like to say thank you to everyone here attending, but also thank you ever so much to Paul Mason as our speaker today. If you want to get in contact with Paul, you can follow him on Twitter, you can find him on LinkedIn and many other places as well. I'd also like to thank Theo and Lauren as well for their contributions today. Very much appreciated. I'm sorry if I didn't get to your question directly, but hopefully we managed to get to the essence of it. There'll be a video posted of this session today. You'll find it on YouTube, and you'll also find it on our Protiviti and Reb at Half website. So please share with your colleagues, invite your friends, your families, your LinkedIn contacts to our session next week. And so until next week, on behalf of my Protivity colleagues and my Robert Half team, I'd like to once again thank Paul, and I'd like to extend our best wishes to you all. Stay safe, be bold, be kind to each other, apply what you've heard today, and we look forward to seeing you all next week. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.